Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Morgan, editor of Fleet Equipment. Welcome to Fleet Equipment Unscripted. Today, we're talking with Scott Soteric, Geotab's Vice President of Commercial Motor Vehicle Solutions. Scott, how are you doing? How's everything going over there?
I'm doing well, Jason. Everything is good. Thanks for having me this morning.
Yeah, happy to talk with you. We talked not too long ago off video recording where we were just kind of chatting about the 3G sunset. And you brought up some really interesting points. So I'm glad you could take the time here to talk about what's going on there and what it all means. For anyone that might not understand what that means when we talk about the 3G sunset, think about your cell phone carriers, right? Your Verizons, your AT&Ts, that network, right? You hear a lot about 4G and 5G now, but 3G is the old technology. I think of flip phones, right? Old flip phones that we all used to have that have kind of gone by the wayside. Those networks are going to start going away. The timelines are a little sketchy from all the different providers. We'll put the details down in the post notes here for the video, but Scott, I just wanted to kind of get a sense for in the trucking world, right? I mentioned the flip phones. When's the last time you saw one of those? But in your view, how much of the 3G impacts the current technology that are on trucks rolling around the road today?
Yeah, so I mean, from a 3G standpoint, it really varies by telematics service provider. What I can say is that the telematics industry is a little different than what you're used to in your phones, and which 4G has really only been common for the last couple of years. And so up till 2017, 2018, the vast majority of the devices that were installed were 3G devices. And so although we don't have an exact number by any means, and it really depends by or varies by provider, there's still millions of devices out there that need to have that transition from 3G or 1XRTT to 4G, and that's going to have to happen over the next 12 to 24 months, depending on who your carrier is.
Right. So if I'm a fleet and I haven't touched my devices in a while, right? I haven't updated in the past year or two. I should probably double check to see what technology those are on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I would highly recommend that you reach out to your telematics service provider if you're not aware what type of technology you have, and get an evaluation, on what you have today, and then what your options are, both with your current provider and possibly even looking at other options as well.
For sure. And one of the things that we had talked about earlier when we were first discussing this is we were kind of joking that, we just went through the ELD mandate update, but this could still impact ELD performance for carriers that do have those older telematic devices, right? If you think, oh, I'm covered, I've got ELDs, I've got telematics. Well, if the solution stopped working, then you're in that same boat again. You got to make sure that you're current. In terms of, so even taking Geotab as an example, let's say I just want to upgrade my hardware with you. How long does that process typically take in switching out the hardware, and what are the big challenges in moving to that new hardware?
Yeah, so I mean, from a Geotab standpoint, it's relatively straightforward. Our device has the same basic form factor as previous generations. So today we have Go 9 devices that in North America are all 4G enabled, depending on which carrier you want: AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, etc. So we have plenty of options for fleets. With that being said, I mean, I think the biggest thing that fleets need to think about is the length of time it's going to take to install these devices, right? So if you have a 10 unit fleet, it's relatively straightforward. You get an installer, you install them yourself, probably can get that done in a couple days or a week. If you have 3,000 vehicles, that's going to take a lot more time and a lot more planning. And so, really, at the end of the day, it's pretty much based on the complexity of your fleet and how large it is, and how often you can get them into the actual location where you're doing the installs. With that being said, the longer you wait until the cutoff date, then things start getting a little bit more complex, right? So if you have 1,000 unit fleet and you're 60 days out, that's going to cause a lot of complexity, I guess would be the best way to put it. But if you start
Right.
that process a year beforehand, you're going to have a lot more. You'll have a better ability to do that maybe at PMs, right? You can swap out the devices. So it really is about planning and not waiting to the last minute, especially for this, because when the network sunset the devices won't work, and that would include your ELD solution as well.
Right, right. And I think that's one of the sticking points and hard things to get a handle of. There's no like date where everybody has to shut down. It's just kind of by provider as they're moving that older technology out and making room for some of the newer technology. So really understanding, what hardware devices you have and what network you're on to kind of understand how much time you would have. You had mentioned maybe installing yourself. Is this something you could work into a PM schedule to swap those out and install them, or is it something that you kind of need to dedicate some time to and do on its own?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the telematics service provider. So somebody like a Geotab, which has a very robust plug-and-play device, you could do that as part of a normal PM. For some devices which require a much more complicated install, you might have to have some additional time set up as part of that PM, possibly, or maybe have a different service date for that specific installation. But it really just depends on your TSP and how complex their install or their install is. So.
Okay. Yeah. No, and that kind of leads me to my next question, which is a good segue. And like, maybe I want to switch my telematics providers, right? Maybe I had jumped into something to satisfy the ELD mandate, and given everything that's happened, the pandemic, I want more visibility into the data. I want more solutions beyond ELD. Maybe I need a more robust provider, or just want to try something different with all the integrations going on that we've seen in the industry. What are some of those features? Let's say I just kind of know about the telematics from the ELD standpoint. What are some of the top features from your point of view that maybe I should be looking at to make sure that I have with my new device or new telematics providers?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a whole host of things that are relevant to think about. I mean, and every fleet's going to be a little bit different. What their pain points are, um, and so on and so forth. With that being said, I mean, there's a couple of things that I'd highly recommend fleets to think about. I mean, this is a big decision if you are going to switch providers, and um, it's something you gotta do your due diligence on. So the things that I think about are first and foremost just time in business and their ability to service you, right? So what I mean by that is, which when the ELD mandate came out, the industry was flooded with hundreds of telematics providers, and so really at the end of the day, you want to be able to make sure that you have a provider who can support you, is going to be around for a long time, has the means to service your fleet, and so on and so forth. So really, just understanding what your telematics partners' long-term goals are, right? How long they've been in business, what are their customers, what do their customers say about them, and
Right.
so on and so forth. One of the other things that I think is really important is in this industry, as with many industries, we as telematics service providers have to be investing in technology, right? If you're not investing, you're falling behind the curve. And so one of the questions that I think is really important is the telematics service provider investing, X amount of the revenue in R&D? How many engineers do they have? How often do they do releases, right? For example, Geotab does 4 firmware releases and 4 software releases per year. We have over 700 technical roles in the company that are creating the best solutions in the world from a telematics standpoint. So we're investing in technology, and that's a really important question to ask.
Right.
Um, a couple of other things. So partnerships. I think in the industry today we have this concept of a telematics service provider needs to be able to provide everything. And so that could be cameras, that could be telematics, that could be asset tracking, that could be a whole host of different things. And I think sometimes we run into this concept of, sure, they might be able to provide everything, but maybe it's not best of breed type solution, right? And so one of the things that Geotab's really focused on is partnerships, right? So we as Geotab understand that we can't be the best at everything, right? And so we focus uh, on telematics, right? And then we have amazing partners that do all types of other things, and then we bring those partners together to give a best in breed type technology, right? And so I have a saying of, we want to be jack of all, master of none. We want to be focused, and we're
Right.
heavily focused on telematics. So partnerships to us is exceptionally important. Two of the other things that most people don't think about, and I know this is a long-winded answer,
No, go for it. I'm with you.
is data ownership, right? And so if you think about data ownership, what I'm really trying to get at is who owns the data, right? So if you look at your end user license agreement, I know, Jason, you've done a lot of work on this.
Right.
What does your telematics service provider do with that data, right? Are they selling it to the open market, the raw data? What are they doing with that? And I think it's a really apt question to ask, is just who owns the data? What do you do with it? And so on and so
Mhm.
forth. So that's one thing, which is something a lot of people don't think through. And then the other thing is security, right? So, I mean, we live in an age of where security is more important than ever. And it's a huge investment. And it's one that most people don't think about until something happens. And
Mhm.
so, another thing I'd highly recommend is asking any telematics service provider, what are they doing from a security standpoint? You know, are they working towards FIPS 140-2 security for the hardware? Are they ISO 27001? Are they NIST 800 certified? Right. So those are some of the things that I would highly recommend that
Mhm.
customers ask. Right, because at the end of the day, this is very sensitive information for a fleet, and we want to keep it as secured as possible.
Right, right. No, I love all those points. You've opened my Pandora's box here a little bit because I do want to comment on a couple of those on the security. And I know we talk about security a lot. I've talked with you a lot about security. And it's difficult on both the telematics providers ends to really talk about it because you don't want to give anything away for anyone that might be listening that want to take advantage of that. And for fleets, it gets very complicated. And I don't know what that is, and that's not my job, right? But you want to make sure. I know that we've worked before on maybe just some questions to ask that even if you don't know what it means, ask your telematics provider and see what they do, right? Because you can tell them the solution there. One quick thing there, and I think this is how it hit me this year. Kind of really just on a side note, Garmin, which does a lot of GPS and that kind of stuff. I've got a Garmin watch. They got hit with a ransomware for I think it was like $10 million. And from a user point of view, I was locked out of my device for about a week and a half. And it's not a big deal. It's steps, it's running, it's stupid stuff, right? That I just do for fun. But if that was my business, right? If I was a fleet and that was my technology, that is a huge problem because not only can I not access it, but now I don't know who has access to it, right? Because now they got into it. On the ownership thing, I know that that can get a little dicey too, and it also rolls in the privacy. But I think from the fleet's point of view, if you look at the importance of that, it's like, okay, well, what about? I think that rolls into like integrations, right? We've talked already. We've had you on the show a couple of times talking about your partnerships and how you're integrating with people. You've mentioned the marketplace, right? And even in my next question that I'm getting to in a kind of a long-winded way here, integrations is important because if you're moving to a new telematics provider, you still want all your old data, right? And you want to make sure that they're going to support you. And then the new provider you're moving to, are you going to help me with my integrations? Are you going to make my life easier? Or is this going to be something I'm going to have to fight every time I want something new, right?
And
Um,
yeah, really quickly before we get to that next question, I'm sorry, Jason, is
that's all right. This is sorry.
no, you're fine. So you made a comment about security and around, it is complex, right? And maybe a
Mhm.
fleet doesn't know the right questions to ask. So there is an organization called the National Motor Freight Traffic Association, so NMFTA, and it's a great organization, and they have all types of resources for fleets to be
Mm.
able to ask the right questions to their telematic service providers around, do you meet this, right? What type of policies do you have in place when this happens, and so on and so forth. So
Oh, nice.
um I know that I was talking with a large fleet yesterday, and they pulled some RFP questions that they put in their RFP, which they sent out. They pulled from NMFTA. So
Nice. Okay.
something else to think about, that there is resources out there.
Okay, perfect. Now I'll definitely link those in the post. And okay, well, so moving on. Sorry, I mean this is what happens when Scott and I start talking. We'll just do this for an hour. Sorry, everyone. But one thing I guess we haven't really talked about, and I haven't really talked about, is what happens when I do move to a new telematics provider. Right in the hardware and truck world, it happens all the time. Fleets run mixed fleets. They switch to different OEMs. in the telematics world, and I just don't know if that happens as often, or maybe they get a lot of stuff built in with the trucks they buy, and so they have a lot of different dashboards, right? But in this new system where things are moving very, very quickly, you have different providers integrating with different people, and you want to take advantage of that, right? What's that learning curve like from your point of view? How do I do it? And going back to the integrations, can I get everything that I had in the data into my new platform and then build on it from there?
Yeah. So I mean, I think, and I know I said this on some of the other questions, is that it really depends on the complexity of the fleet, right? So if
Right.
you're a fleet that just needs hours of service, um, and some basic dispatching functionality, I think generally speaking, it would be a relatively easy transition. Now, you still have to make sure that the dispatcher, that operations, the maintenance, safety, the drivers, the driver trainers, those people have an understanding of what the new system is, how it works, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So, small, medium, or large fleet, you have to make sure that everybody's on board, everybody's trained, and make sure everybody at high levels on the same page, right? From an installation standpoint, don't wait, right? These things take time, right? If you're a larger fleet, it's going to take many months, if not up to a year, depending on how large the fleet is. So, from an installation standpoint, I think the words of wisdom, at least from our side, is don't wait to the last minute. As far as the integrations go, I mean, from a software standpoint, most of the major partners out there for TMS, for maintenance, for tire pressure monitoring, for weight station bypass, and those types of things, those guys are pretty commonly integrated across most major TSPs. So when Geotab, for example, gets an RFP and it says, hey, we integrate with these 8 providers, how many of them do you have? Typically, we have all 8, or maybe we're missing 1 or 2. But in most cases, we have options for those fleets as far as integrations we already have. Once again, I think that this is similar to the hardware, in which you don't want to wait to the last minute, right? In the sense of, these things do take time, right? And especially if everybody waits to the last minute, you're going to have a backlog of installers, development work that needs to be done, and so on. So I think that those conversations need to be had ahead of time, and then the development work, if there is any that needs to be done, can be done with enough time to get that fleet up and going and having a similar solution to what they had. And then the one thing I would challenge any fleet that's listening to this podcast is that, what you had, in my opinion at least, should form a foundation of what you're looking for. But then you want to take that next step, right? It could be an improved driver workflow, so you can improve your recruitment pitch, right? To your drivers. It could be something for your maintenance folks or your safety folks that adds that next level of functionality. And at the end of the day, our goal as a telematics provider is to automate, and at the end of the day, make our customers' jobs much easier to do. So
Right. No, and that's a great point, because I think it's easy to take technology for granted, because it seems like some sort of magic box that I plug in and it instantly just works, and then I want it to do X, Y, Z. But right, it's a lot like truck cycles, right? You have a truck cycle, you stick to it, you know how long it takes to get trucks off the factory floor in your fleet, get drivers trained, get them rolling, right? This really isn't any different, even though it seems like, kind of intangible software benefits, same kind of thing. No, very good, very good. I could ask another 10 questions, but I know I should let you go. We should let everybody get on with their days. I appreciate you taking the time, and I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Jason.